Is it because you could see the bulge right there? I know they've been talking about it, girl. Everybody talks about it. When we read the Tony Turner book, I forget the name of that book, but shout out to Tony Turner. He's the one that told us that Otis was a horse of a man. After Mudcat came another star, but this one was in the music business, a singer who will always be special to me. After all, you never forget the first man who asked you to marry him. In his autobiography, Otis Williams says we met while out on tour. That may be so, but I remember our meeting differently. It was the last weekend in April 1963, a date I'll never forget, and you'll see why when I tell you about it. It was one of those rare times when the Bluebells had a night off and the house was quiet. Barbara and Jackie both had dates over, and I was looking forward to getting into a hot bubble bath with an ice-cold beer and turning in early for the night. Y'all, because I'm not really a drinker, but when I do drink, it's typically when I go to some kind of sporting event. It ain't nothing like having a goddamn Bud Light Lime. Just watching the game with the Bud Light Lime. Like I'm that girl at the bar, not ordering, may I have an apple martini? No, that's not me, bitch. I'm the one who's getting the Bud Light Lime. Garçon, if you ain't got a Bud Light Lime, can you give me a Corona Light and squeeze some lime juice in it? Okay, thank you. I'll tip you. Okay, make sure it tastes nice and limey. As I was saying goodnight to Chubby, there was a knock at the door. It was late, but I figured it was somebody looking for one of my sisters since nobody knew I was home. I was right. It was Armstead Edwards, looking fine in a suit and looking for Barbara. The situation threw me for a minute. I knew he was crazy about Barbara, always had been, from the early days when we all sang together in church in the young adult choir. But I knew they couldn't have a date. Barbara's date was already there. Armstead is there, dressed up real nice, because he didn't ask this other girl to go out with him to see the Temptations, but the girl stood him up. As we sat talking in the kitchen, Armstead told me the whole sad story. He was celebrating his 21st birthday. He wanted it to be a special night, a night he'd never forget, so he had gone all out. He had reservations at the hottest club in town, the Showboat, down on Lombard Street. The Temptations were performing that night, and everybody wanted to be there. Well, almost everybody. Apparently, Armstead's date, who lived in the neighborhood, wanted to be somewhere else. She stood him up. He told me he just couldn't face going back home. Not yet. Not barely an hour after he had left. He knew Chubby's house was always full, and even if he didn't catch Barbara, he knew there would be somebody home to keep him company. Poor thing. Not only was his date a no-show, but Barbara's date was already there. That left me. Okay, so dig this. Number one, I want to know what dumb beach. I don't care if Armstead was the squarest dude in town. What dumb beach wouldn't want to go see the Temptations? I listened to his story. All I could think about was my bubble bath, my beer, and my bed. But I felt so bad for him. As the bubbles started bursting in my head, I heard myself saying, "Would you like to settle for me?" Oh, that's so sweet. So very sweet. That's how I ended up at the Showboat the night the Temptations were performing. And they were awesome. In the 60s, the Temps had the baddest steps, the baddest suits, and the baddest sound in soul music. But on that night, it wasn't the group that held my attention. It was their founding member who kept tempting me. Through much of their performance, I sat in the audience making eyes at Otis, winking and blinking at him from across the room. Girl, was it because you could see the dick through his pants in them tight-ass Temptation suit? Is it because you could see the bulge right there? I know they've been talking about it, girl. Everybody talks about it. When we read the Tony Turner book, I forget the name of that book, but shout out to Tony Turner. He's the one that told us that Otis was a horse of a man, kind of like that Drake, but not quite close. Did y'all see that Drake video, y'all? I still don't quite understand it. I was like, what was that? Why is it so snaky like that? Why is it so wobbly? Like it's wobbly, like that blow up balloon that you see in front of the dealerships. You know, it's like that thing that just be wiggling around. I was so confused about it. And then why is he so light skinned and the wiggly was like black or blue black? That's confusing to me, sir. But on the night, it wasn't the group that held my attention. It was their founding member who kept tempting me. Through much of their performance, I sat in the audience making eyes at Otis, winking and blinking at him from across the room. When the Temps finished their set, I told Armstead I wanted to meet him, but I had a problem. I knew Otis would never come over to the table and talk to me if he thought I was with Armstead. I mean, really, with Armstead. So I did the only thing I could think. I asked Armstead to introduce us. Now, this is kind of weird, like a regular guy just walking over to the Temptation saying, "Hey, Temptation, would you like to meet Patsy Holt, i.e. Patti Labelle?" Now, don't you get all bent out of shape. Armstead didn't mind. In fact, he was totally cool with it. He knew we weren't a couple. The whole time he was driving to the club, I kept teasing him nonstop. "You know you're going to owe me big time for this one, since you know this is strictly a mercy date." As I sat at the table chatting with singer Dee Dee Sharp, Armstead hooked the whole thing up. The next thing I knew, Otis was standing at our table and we were exchanging phone numbers. By the end of the year, Otis and I were a couple. In February of 1964, his career took off like a rocket when the Temps single, "The Way You Do the Things You Do," charted pop and R&B. Though it was their 7th single, it was their first big-time hit. And after that, things got crazy between his touring schedule and mine. The only time Otis and I saw each other was when he got to Philly, or when he wasn't with Flo. That's kind of crazy to think. Yeah. What I hear about Otis, he had a girlfriend, okay? Otis so full of shit. That big ass dingling. He looked like the kind of man that got nipple rings and get real freaky. And after that, things got crazy. Between his touring schedule and mine, the only time Otis and I saw each other was when he got to Philly. If I was there. That's where he proposed, in Philly, sitting on Chubby's sofa. And I wish you could have seen that diamond ring he gave me. Honey, that thing was so big I could have used it as a headlight. But it was the light of his personality that had hypnotized me. You mean his big ego, girl? The way he did the things he did. Our romance had been a whirlwind of brief encounters. Yeah, because when he wasn't with you, he had a girlfriend and he was chasing behind that goddamn Flo. It had been exciting and I looked forward to a lifetime of excitement. I said yes. Otis and I had a lot of good times together, but the more we discussed our future, the more I began to feel things might change. I got the impression that Otis wanted a very traditional home life once I became Mrs. Williams. Rightly or wrongly, I honestly believed he wanted me to leave Philly and move with him to Detroit. Worse, I was convinced he wanted me to slow down my singer career. I couldn't see myself doing either. Philly was my home, and music was my life. This was going to be a problem, a big problem. You know what else was a big problem? Later, Patti Labelle admitted to interviewers that she don't know whether or not she was in love with Otis Williams or the Temptations. Girl, I know what you're talking about. Okay. So I am emphatically in love with the new edition. Okay. And everybody's know that Ronnie Devo is my favorite. The problem is if I was out on a date with Ronnie DeVoe, I wouldn't be able to keep my eyes off of the Michael Bivins. Maybe I could keep my eyes off the Michael Bivins, but and maybe the Ralph Tresvant. But if Bobby was there, I mean, goddamn, it's Bobby. Okay, yes, he looked like T.D. Jakes right now, but it's still the goddamn Bobby. Okay, and I mean, to be honest with you, the Johnny Gill, I would be hopeful that he would sing me a song. So I get it, girl. You know, you sitting there with Ronnie DeVoe. Oh, and Ricky, I might ask Ricky to sing me a song because I might look at Ralph too long. You know what I'm saying? And then Ronnie DeVoe would be like, girl, what the fuck is you looking at? I'd be like, Ralph. I mean, it's fucking Ralph. Part of me wanted to be married, but most of me didn't want to give up anything to do with it. I didn't know how to tell Otis, and so I started confiding in Armstead. Since the night he introduced me to Otis, we had become good friends. I loved his conversation and his company. He was funny, kind, sensitive, and smarter than anyone I had ever met. He was about to graduate from Cheney College with a BS in education, but as comfortable as I was talking with him, one night he shocked the fool out of me. I was crying on his shoulder about Otis again. Why? Because, girl, he put you in a wheelchair the next day? When he took my hand in both his hands, looked me straight in the eye and said it. Well, Pat, if things don't work out between you and Otis, I'm here for you. I remember thinking, did he just say what I think he said? Was boyfriend trying to throw me a hint that he is interested in me? It sure sounded romantic, but as fine as he was, Armstead had never so much as even flirted with me before. And I had never given much thought to all those times he had come by whenever Otis was visiting, even though it kind of looked like he was trying to outsit Otis. Meaning that he basically was walking Otis to, bye, Otis, bye. Don't you got to get back on the road with the Temptations? Ain't it something you can do? Don't you gotta go somewhere? Don't you gotta go visit Flo? After all, since our days growing up in Elmwood together, I always knew he was interested in Barbara. I decided I must have been misreading the whole thing, blowing the whole situation out of proportion. What he really meant was that he would always be there for me whenever I needed a friend. Not long after the conversation, I worked it all out in my head, in my heart. I told Chubby I didn't think I could marry Otis, and I was planning to break the news to him soon. You have to follow your heart, she said, and I did. When Otis and I finally talked, he seemed to understand my feelings and wished me well. Yeah, girl, 'cause he's still chasing after Flo. Why he got a goddamn girlfriend? As for the ring, I didn't feel right wearing it, so I gave it to Chubby. To this day, I don't know what happened to it. Child, I did that before, too. A boy gave me a ring. And I didn't feel right wearing it. And my mama took it from me. My mama said, Nene, where you get that ring from? I said, my friend boy gave it to me. Your friend boy? Who he steal that ring from? His grandmama? Yeah, he stole that ring from his grandmother. But whatever the case, my mother wasn't giving it back to the grandmother or me. What I do know is that when I told Armstead I had broken my engagement, he seemed unusually happy. I was still feeling guilty about the breakup, and sometimes not often, but sometimes I wondered if I had made the right decision. Girl, you made the right decision. It wasn't just that I had broken up with a great guy who treated me well. Let's be real here. Otis was one of the most eligible bachelors in the country, rich, famous, and internationally adored. Part of me thought I was crazy. Armstead's support helped me get through it. He said the same thing Chubby did, that I had to follow my heart. But he took it one step further. You can't live your life for other people, he told me. You have to be true to yourself. Word. Fortunately, we were pretty well known in and around Philly, and it was only a matter of months before we inked a new deal. It was with Cameo Parkway, Philly's leading independent label, and the company that released all of Chubby Checker's early hits. Though we only recorded 3 singles for the label, You'll Never Walk Away, One Phone Call, and the Irish classic Danny Boy. It was a hectic time for us. In September, we toured for a few weeks with the Iceman Jerry Butler, who was on his own after getting his start with Curtis Mayfield. And the Impressions. On Jerry's tour, we did double duty. We were his warm-up and backup. Of all places we played, my favorite was the Apollo in New York, although the conditions were hardly ideal.
Taking a ride on the east side, made a left on MLK. What a beautiful day, what a beautiful day. Riding high on the west side, looking for a hood rat to play. Won't you come out and play, won't you come out and play? Hey, taking a ride, hey, hey, on the south side, ooh, ooh, hey, hey, hey.